Thanks.
Hi, guys, and welcome to the That's Where I'm At podcast. Today, I want to introduce you to someone who's going to talk to us about toxic shame and recovery from toxic shame. After leaving the business world, Emily was a classroom teacher in a low income area and had the opportunity to teach English in South Korea. She is fluent in Spanish, and her hobbies include sitting on a hammock by the lake, which sounds amazing, painting, and baking. She shares her story from the stage of God's grace in her life and walks alongside women who find themselves in a tough place and needing encouragement and support. She is passionate about turning around stinking thinking and finding the root of issues and not just placing a band aid or a quick fix on it. She lives in Dallas, Texas with her husband, Pierre. Welcome, Emily.
Hello, glad to be here.
I am so glad you're here. This is going to be
Thank
such a
you.
good topic. Doesn't sound like it would be a good topic, right? Let's talk about
Yes,
toxic shame.
a
I,
heavy topic, but a
it
good
is
topic.
but but I know this is going to resonate with a lot of people because it's something that a lot of people struggle with. And I don't know if people always know that they are in shame because shame is very isolating. And so
Yeah.
sometimes we can just isolate and go, no, I'm fine. But we might actually be in shame. So thank you
hmm
for sharing your story with us today. So let's talk about. So do you usually, when you're speaking in some of these places, is that what you're talking about? Toxic shame and things like that, toxic relationships?
So actually, like you said, shame can be hidden and we don't even know we have it.
Right.
So it was probably 3 years ago that I actually realized what toxic shame was
Okay.
and had a label for it. And so when I shared my story on a stage talking about like what God had done in my life and the healing he
Hmm.
had brought a lot of healing from toxic shame, but at that time I didn't even know what toxic shame was.
Wow.
It wasn't until a few years later, as I did more healing and went through this course, where they broke down toxic shame and what it is and how it works. And I was like, that is what I've been trying to find in counseling
Um,
and uncover. Like, there's something that needs to be healed that I don't know what. And we were just like digging to
yes.
kind of find it.
So why did you feel like you needed, well, did you feel like you needed to put a name on it, or did you just feel like you weren't quite sure how to get to what it was that you were feeling, even though you were doing some
Um,
healing?
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily looking for a label, but I was in counseling and I just had that sense. Like I knew there was something there
Yeah.
that still needed to be worked on.
Yeah.
And then, as I'll talk about, later on, like marriage was super hard for us. And so just went through this course to kind of like get rebalanced. And, it just talked about boundaries and anger and toxic
Right.
shame and just like a whole range of things.
Okay.
And as they went through toxic shame and like what it looks like and how it works, I was like, that,
That's
that's what
it.
I've been trying to like heal from. That's what I've been trying to like uncover
Yeah.
and break free from. And so having that name and knowing what it was and how it worked
Yeah.
really helped me just break free from it. Just having that knowledge of what it was and how it worked, then I knew what to do or not do.
That makes sense to me. That resonates with me because I knew that there were issues in my marriage. And then, but the day I heard about narcissism and gaslighting, I was like, that's it. And so you feel like you're equipped, right? You're like, now I can
Uh-huh.
go, now I know what I'm trying to work on
Uh-huh.
here. Yeah. So that I totally
Yeah.
get. Okay. So now that you said that, I totally get that. So let's
Yeah.
talk about what this looked like in your life, even in your life growing up, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah. So I think, really it got started just from like messages that I received. Maybe they weren't spoken, but that's kind of, like what I picked up in the
Okay.
environment that I was in. Feelings were just kind of taboo. It wasn't like anyone ever said, don't feel,
Yeah.
but I kind of learned. But when I feel, I get in trouble for feeling.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm being told I'm too sensitive. So let me
Yeah.
just not feel. go quiet,
Yes.
and so that was, I think, where it kind of started, my mom would comment on my weight, like, oh, you look like you've gained weight. Oh, you look like you've lost weight. Well, for me, I looked around and I always saw like all the girls my age were always bigger than me. Like
Right.
I wasn't a size zero. My family had hips, they have thighs,
Yeah.
they have curves. But I didn't know, like, oh, that's a good thing. I'm just built differently.
Hmm.
I looked at it as, well, I'm heavy. Oh, my mom is commenting on my weight. I must be heavy. I don't feel beautiful. I don't hear I'm beautiful.
Yeah.
And so it was just things like that that kind of gave that toxic shame a foothold,
Yeah.
without even knowing what was happening.
Right. And those are things that, I mean, when we grow up in our environment, we don't know, right? I
Mm-mm.
mean, you said you saw, other girls and whatever, but did you have anybody around you telling you anything else, or did you even ask anybody, did you even feel like to ask anybody, am I fat or am I too skinny or whatever it is? You know what I mean?
No, like it never even crossed my mind.
Right.
Like I'm sure at some point someone told me I was beautiful, but I don't remember hearing that. So it was just kind of like I internalized the comment about my weight, looking around, seeing, oh, I look different from other people, therefore I must not be beautiful.
Right.
And I carried that with me until I was like 22.
Yeah.
I was around a lot of Hispanics and they're very flattering and they're always like, hola, guapa, like, hello, beautiful.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, I don't feel beautiful, but it's nice to hear I'm beautiful.
Right.
But after a few years of hearing that, and like I would tell people as I started feeling more comfortable and knowing some people more, but like, I don't feel beautiful. Like, am I really beautiful? Or are you just saying this because it's like a cultural thing for you? And they're like, no, you're beautiful.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, okay, that's something to think about. And it kind of took a few years to sink in and believe, like, oh, I am beautiful.
Right. And what was home life like overall, with your relationship with your parents?
I would say it was a pretty traditional home. Mom and dad are still married,
Uh-huh.
two brothers, Christian home. So, from a kid's point of view, everything was normal.
Right.
You don't think anything about it. I do remember, us getting in trouble a lot, but as a kid, you just think that's normal.
Right.
That's all I know. I remember hearing my brother and his friends talking about, why do our moms yell at us so much? And I was like, oh, okay. So, like, it's
Oh,
not just me that's thinking this. Cause once again, like, I didn't talk to my brothers, I didn't ask
okay.
anyone about it. But, like, that was something I had noticed. And
Right.
especially like going into the teenage years, like, I noticed I'm the only one having like troubles with mom.
Mm.
And my brothers are just like kind of flying under the radar. So,
Oh,
like, I must be too sensitive.
yes.
I must be bad.
Hmm.
I must be broken. There must be something wrong with me because, once again, I'm looking around and I'm the only one having troubles. Like,
Oh,
everyone
interesting.
else seems to be fine. And so that was also something that I internalized, like, there's something wrong with me.
Right.
But inside, there was always kind of this like gut feeling,
Hmm.
but something doesn't seem right. But
Hmm.
once again, like as kids, we don't have the brain development to really
No.
think through things rationally and be like, okay, yeah, this doesn't feel good. But
Right.
looking at this logically, like I'm not always wrong. Because from like where I sat, I felt like I was always wrong.
Okay.
And so now looking at it, I'm like, no, I wasn't always wrong. Like that gut was like a warning, which because feelings were kind of taboo and ignored,
Right.
I didn't know that feeling was a
Okay.
warning. I didn't know that that was maybe the Holy Spirit talking to me or
Right.
something I should even listen to. But it
Right.
was like this feeling that as I got in college and looked around, I was like, oh, so you tell your mom, like, who, if a guy likes you,
Yeah.
if you like someone, I was like, oh, I would never do that. Like,
Okay.
That won't go well. It won't feel nice. So I
Right.
just won't do it. And I
Yeah.
just always thought that was normal. I just thought, oh, that's what everyone does with their mom. And I was like, no, I don't feel safe sharing. So
Yeah.
I don't. But
Yeah.
once I got in college, I realized like it's not the same for everyone else.
Yeah, and I remember that kind of thing too, that I don't think I had that kind of relationship with my mom or dad, to be able to
Mm-hmm.
just say like, "Oh, this boy likes me." I think my mom would have panicked that, "Oh my gosh, you're going to have sex or something." You know what I mean? Like
Uh-huh.
there was no just chatting,
Yes.
about it. So as my kids have gotten older, I've learned to have I enjoy that I have a more of a friendship. So it sounds like excuse me, it sounds like you were kind of the scapegoat or you were the target in your family for that kind of thing. And then as you saw other people, like when you were in college, having these different relationships, what happened then? Did you still have a relationship with your mom? Were you, still living at home when when you were going to college?
So I went to college in another city. So I would go back for like breaks and stuff like that. It would always be hard. It would always be frustrating.
Okay.
And I was like, man, people always talk about the teenage years, but like, I'm not a teenager anymore. Like, why is this still happening? And,
Yeah.
I would see other kids excited to go home for a break. And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm not. I wish I was, but like, I
It's
know there's going to be
hard.
things that make me feel bad that I'm
Yeah.
messed up and it doesn't feel good. So I'm not excited.
It's hard when you're an adult too. I remember my kids saying that to me, like, "Mom, like I live on my own most, most of the year," and I'm
Uh-huh.
like, "I know, but you're in my house. I thought I was supposed to, whatever."
Uh-huh.
And so that's
I'm
hard.
sure there's
But
like a
yeah,
big transition.
well, it is, but it's nice that but see, we had a relationship, right? You didn't have that. You didn't feel like you had that relationship to
Hmm.
be able to say like, "Hey, I'm an adult and I'm like doing things on my own most of the time." It was nice that they could say that to me, and I'd be like, "Yeah, yeah, you're right, you're right." Me,
Uh-huh.
those
Yeah,
kinds
I
of things.
definitely didn't have that feeling
Right,
of safety to speak up and be like, hey, mom, I'm all grown up. Like,
right,
I'm just back visiting. I'm
right,
just an adult in your house. I need to
right.
transition or, whatever.
Stop treating me like I'm 13 or whatever, right?
Uh-huh.
So where do you feel like you were abandoning yourself with some of these, maybe some signs that you like that, where you were an adult, right? But you were like, I don't know if this is okay. Like this does not feel okay with me. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like where were you abandoning yourself?
I think the biggest one abandoning myself was just listening to my body,
Mhm.
listening to that gut. Growing up in the environment that I did, there was a lot of invalidation. And so that created like me second guessing myself. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I felt that gut, but I would just second guess it. Oh, well, they're the adults. They must be right. I must be wrong.
Yeah.
And so, kind of getting that feeling of like feelings aren't good. Don't listen to them. Don't pay attention. Suppress them. I did. And so, you feel those sensations in your body and you don't know you're nearing burnout, you
Right.
know? And so you just go, go, go until you crash. And then
Right.
you spend a week or two recovering, you pick yourself back up, you go until you crash, because I just thought that's what you do.
Right.
I didn't know, like, oh, if I'm feeling impatient right now, I might be overwhelmed. That means
Yeah.
I should step back and breathe. Or if I'm feeling like I'm going to crash, maybe I should reach out to someone and be like, hey, can we cancel our plans tonight? Like,
Yeah.
my body is crashing. Can we reschedule? Like, I just
Right.
think, oh, you just push through. That's what
Right.
you do.
Right.
Often, thinking that's selfish, that
Well, and
those
especially if you're
feelings.
taught that, right? If you're taught
Mm-hmm.
that you're not allowed to have feelings, you're not being taught to listen to your body in any
Mm-hmm.
way. You're being told, well, whatever you are feeling is probably wrong. Then I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure, and I totally get that because, I remember that too, in just not really knowing. Like, I didn't know how to make decisions even growing up, I'd be like, I don't know. I have no idea. And even after I
Uh-huh.
got divorced, my dad was like, I was really worried about you. I didn't think you could live on your own. And I'm like, what?
I'm like, oh.
I was like, I'm 55. I was like, how can I not live on my own? But I could, but he just never saw me in that way. He still saw me as
Uh-huh.
12 years old or whatever. And so I just thought that was really interesting. Like, I can survive. But of course, that's kind of the environment I was in my marriage. And people thought I was very, you know, um, I just couldn't do it on my own. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So, talk to me about, you said later on that in your marriage is when you guys were going through some workshops and stuff that that's when you learned about toxic shame. But what did it look like in between college and getting married or going through this workshop? Like what kind of a
Hmm.
relationship did you end up having with your mom? Did you continue a relationship with your mom?
Yeah, we still have a relationship, but it was something that was always challenging.
Hmm.
I never have gotten to the place where I feel like it's a friendship,
Okay.
which is hard.
Yeah.
But it's just something that I have to keep kind of at a superficial level,
Hmm.
just for my own mental and emotional health.
Right.
Um, and so, I see them, I talk to them, all as well, but there's not that close
Yeah.
relationship like, I would want to have with my daughter or I would long to have. So it's
Right.
been a challenge throughout the years. And that's kind of what led me to regeneration
Okay.
was because I was tired of that cycle. And I was like, I've prayed, I've memorized verses around this struggle. Like,
Right.
I don't know what else to do, but it feels really icky inside
Right.
of me. And I'm tired of living in this cycle, like I had learned to apologize. And so I would often be impatient with my mom and I would always apologize.
Okay.
But it doesn't feel nice apologizing in every single conversation because you're getting frustrated and impatient,
Yeah.
and over the years I had to learn how to have boundaries and, not put myself in situations where I was going to be invalidated
Right.
or, things like that. And so keeping it superficial, less is more kind of
Yeah.
thing. Um, that's where I got to probably like, well, it's been a work in progress,
Sure.
but that's initially what took me to regeneration is like, I'm tired of this. This is my last hope.
Right.
And, kind of was like, so my church had this program that was for hurts, habits, and hangups.
Mm-hmm.
I saw it in like the little Sunday flyer, and I was
Yeah.
like, well, this might be my answer. Like,
Right.
don't have a lot of hope in it. Like, but by that point, I'm 29.
Okay.
So I'm like, I mean, this has been going on for years. I don't know what's going on, but it doesn't
Right.
feel good. I don't like it. I can't control like how anyone shows up,
Right.
but no matter how anyone shows up, like I want to honor God
Mm-hmm.
with how I show up,
Yeah.
whether they show up 100%, 50%, 0%. Like I knew how I wanted to show up and I couldn't.
I want to ask
And
you
so,
before you go into the program, which is also called Celebrate Recovery
yes.
in many places. So we'll have a link for that in the show notes. When how were you in general, even with friendships and stuff like that? Did you feel like you didn't have boundaries? You didn't know how to really, were you, because you were talking about how the hurts, habits, and hangups, and it's like, what was it just with your parents, or were you having relationship in general issues kind of thing?
No, that was like pretty much the main thing
Okay.
that drove me there. Like
Yeah.
there were other things that like it was very helpful for me for along the way, but that was
Yeah.
like, this is my top thing. I need help.
Yes.
Like, and
Yes.
then of course that trickled down.
Of course.
But like, yeah, there were still things with friends, because I
Yep.
was a people pleaser. I was a chameleon. I just kind of
Okay.
like evolved into whatever I felt like wouldn't get me attacked or criticized or shamed.
Yes.
to kind of like, to a certain extent, like I had limits. I wouldn't like
Do whatever.
completely chameleon, but
Yeah.
like there was like a morphine that would happen to the
Yeah.
point, people like, where do you want to go eat? I never had an opinion and I just thought I didn't have an opinion.
Right.
But I did have an opinion. I learned. I just didn't think it was important enough to say anything
Yes.
because I didn't think I would ever be heard. So why bother? Because no one's going to hear me anyways. They're going to go somewhere else.
Well, sure. That's how you were
So if it's
trained.
not even going to be considered, let me just, go quiet.
Well, it's so true. And so that's what, in a way, what the people pleasing and codependency really looks like, right? And so, because that's one of the first things that I would looked at as well, was that codependency is like every little thing. I don't know. It doesn't matter, because if you were quiet and small, it's just easier. It's just easier.
Mm-hmm.
People don't get as upset. People still get upset. So I don't know why we do it.
Yeah.
It's just
I
easier to
would
keep
like
them.
pick and choose my battles. Like
Yes.
if I saw it as insignificant, I'm like, it doesn't matter. So
Yes.
what, I want to go to a hamburger and they want to go to Mexican, like
Yeah.
I'm going to avoid it for that icky feeling. But that was also something I noticed, like, well, I had lost a lot of my voice. Like
Uh-huh.
I wasn't afraid to speak up. And I think that's what got me in trouble in the teenage years,
Okay.
is because I would speak up and I would speak my mind.
Well, yeah.
And, if it was important enough, like I could and I would, because then it was like the cost outweighed the benefit in my
Yes.
mind.
Yes.
Like where it was like, okay, I have to speak up because this isn't right. Like this doesn't agree with me,
Right.
like something inside. So to like honor myself to a point, I
I
would
can
speak up.
I can totally relate to that people pleasing and the chameleon. I always call myself a shapeshifter. It's like, whatever, because
Uh-huh.
and that was one of the things too with being self-aware that I was doing it, because I didn't want to I'm not dating, but I didn't want to go into another relationship and be like, like the runaway bride, where she doesn't even know what
Uh-huh.
kind of eggs she likes, right? I didn't want to be that person, because
Uh-huh.
I could easily be that person. So you hear about this program, and that's the nice thing about Celebrate Recovery, and then at her church it was called Regenerate, where you can go for hurts, habits, or hangups. And so they do everything there. And I know that so
Yeah.
many people I know have gone through the program for codependency and different things. They also deal with drug addiction and other things. So there's lots of options for you there, and you can find it anywhere. We'll have the link in the comments. So tell me about what it was like, even though you were like, this is my last hope. Who
Yeah.
knows?
And even then, like I didn't have a lot of hope. Like
Yeah.
they said, you get in what you get out what you put in. And I was like, well,
Okay.
I know me. I'm gonna put in 110% because I'm desperate.
Okay.
Like I know me, I'm disciplined, I'll put in the work, I want
Yeah.
the result. But I believed like, but I'm gonna be the exception to the rule.
Okay.
I'm gonna put in that 110% and I'm gonna come out with 0%, maybe 10%, like minimal.
You just felt like
And
it's not going to work for me.
yeah, I
Okay.
just felt like it's going to be same old, but I won't know if I don't try.
Yep.
But it was the complete opposite. There wasn't like any certain turning point, but like you said, it's for anything and everything.
Right.
And so they just like, it's very thorough, and they walk you through the steps. They give you questions and they just help you unpack what is happening inside, ask you questions, see what wounds you have,
Yes.
see whatever is going on. And somewhere through that process, I got to the other side and I felt so alive.
That's so
Just
awesome.
like my world went from gray to color.
Wow.
Because I remember like there were times, even in my teenage years, where like life was just hard. Like
Mhm.
I didn't want to live anymore. Like I never had thoughts about killing myself, but I just wasn't enjoying life. It wasn't fun.
Yeah.
Even, getting out of the house, like I remember going at post college to work and being like, is this all life is? Like you go to work, you go home, there's a few obstacles along the way and you start over? Like
Yeah.
this is what the next 50 years is. I don't want to live it. Like
Right.
not thinking or taking my own life, but like,
Right.
what is the point?
Right.
And like as a believer, I was like, they say there's life in Christ. They say there's freedom in Christ, but there's like something missing. Like I don't feel free.
Right.
I feel like kind of chained down, weighted down. Like my world is gray, not free and light and colorful.
Right.
And I remember getting to the other side and it was like, wow, my world is like full of bright colors everywhere. And, I don't think I mentioned earlier, but like
Uh-huh.
it would be little things where I would just not laugh out loud because, the smaller you make yourself, the safer it seems to
Yes.
be.
Yes.
And so I was laughing out loud. I'd be watching a movie and I'd be like, ha ha ha. And I was like, whoa, who is that? Because like I would never laugh
That's
out
amazing. Yeah,
loud.
that's a really
I'd get excited.
yes.
Um, like when I wrote my book and I would get a sale, I'd be like jumping up and down, like,
Right.
and I was like, who are you? Usually be like, oh wow, that's cool,
Yeah.
and like contain it.
Almost like you're too scared to celebrate yourself because really,
Mm-hmm.
did anybody celebrate you before? I know I had things like that. I can totally relate to that. If something happened and I would have people in my life going, well, I mean, that's not that big a deal. You sold one book, big deal. You know what I mean? And it's like, no,
Uh-huh.
thank God I have people in my life right now. And I celebrate myself that when I get a sale on my journals, I am so proud of myself. I go, wow, great
Uh-huh.
job, because if no, you got to celebrate yourself for sure. So that's really great that you were able to do that. And I know that we will put the link in the comments for Emily's website because she does have a couple of books. And tell us, are you talking about toxic shame and recovery from toxic shame in the books?
Yes. So I wrote two books. One of
Okay.
them I co-authored with 11 other women. And so each of them shared a piece of their story, whether it be divorce, abusive relationships, like whatever it was.
Okay.
And so they shared their story in just one chapter of kind of how God got them through
Okay.
to the other side to hopefully bring hope and encouragement to other women in hard times. Because I mean,
Right.
we've all gone through something.
Yes.
And so sometimes we all need a little encouragement. And then from there, I was like, you know what? I really kind of like writing and I've wanted to do something with it and been praying about it. And I think this is like kind of God leading and guiding.
Yes.
So let me take this momentum. And then that's when I wrote my book. And that's where I really unpacked instead of, one chapter, like a whole book
Okay.
of like, here's where I was, here's what it looked like for me, here are some of the tools along the way that
Yes.
have helped me, what is stinking thinking, how can you overcome it? Because a lot
Yeah.
of times, like toxic shame, it's your thinking, like it's just terrible thinking, stinking thinking, like that's what I call it because it's
Right.
catchy. And so
Right.
I'm like, gotta stop that stinking thinking because, it's not that we're bad.
Right.
It's I made a mistake and I'm human.
Right.
I can make mistakes. Humans do make mistakes.
Right.
But there's something I learned about in the program that talks about like superhuman and human and subhuman.
Okay.
And so when you're going through like toxic shame, a lot of times you can go into like superhuman, which is like perfectionism and keeping everything
Oh,
100%.
okay.
So you can't feel it. So you look good and you can feel good and you can just avoid that, like, oh, shoot, I made a mistake.
Right.
And then there's like the subhuman of like, oh, I'm terrible, I'm bad, I'm horrible, I'm
Okay.
messed up, I'm broken. And that's the subhuman. And you can kind of like go between the two.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times, like I would live in superhuman to try and like prevent any sort of attacks or criticisms, anywhere.
Right.
Or even just like if your house got out of order, it could be so simple as, oh, my house is a mess. I'm a bad wife or I'm a bad housekeeper. But
Okay.
no, life is just busy and your house is a mess. That doesn't define you. You're not bad. But if
Right.
you're like subhuman, or that could trigger you going to subhuman.
Mhm.
And so you can kind of like go between the two, which is exhausting.
It is. And I know a lot of people struggle with that. So I know that's going to resonate with people. And so what they're teaching you is really to get to that place of just being human, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I,
Do you have your book there? Because I want
yes.
because well, yes. Okay, so go to YouTube so you guys can see it and then go buy her book. Because hold it up because I love the way that you did the tree is a heart, and then in the roots it says shame, and I just love it. It's called Finding the Roots, so you have to go and talk about that. You have to go and look at that. Okay, so
Thanks.
in the program they're trying to teach you, right, where just to get to a place of being a normal human. And so what kinds of
Mhm.
things did you learn that you said, my gosh, my world just felt like it was in color. What stands out to you that you felt like you really learned that you could take with you and utilize in your everyday life?
Well, the first program, so there was Regeneration, and that's the
Okay.
one where I really felt alive. And then the workshop that I did later was
Yes.
probably like 5 years later. So when I got
Okay.
out of the Regeneration,
Uh-huh.
I just felt like alive. I felt light.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember having conversations with my mom where I wasn't getting frustrated and I wasn't getting
Amazing.
impatient. Like, no matter what was happening, it was just like flowing off of me. And like, it's
Yeah.
been up and down since, but like, I'll never forget that first time. I was just like, whoa, I
Right.
was not the exception to the rule. Like, this is legit. This is crazy. And it
Yes.
was just mind blowing. And then that's where like the workshop really came in because it talks about like also guilt and shame, you
Okay.
know? So like by the time marriage got hard, or even like mom, I would get impatient.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be having those thoughts of like, I'm bad. Well,
Right.
pre the workshop, I probably still did. I
Yeah.
knew it didn't define me. That wasn't my identity, but there was still a lot of stinking thinking that was going on.
Right.
But then by the time I get married, the workshop and marriage happened very similar
Okay.
in timing. So when I learned like there's a difference between guilt and shame, shame means like I am bad
Okay.
versus guilt, like, oops, I did something bad, like
Right.
say you have a presentation and you bomb it. If you're operating in like toxic shame, you'll be like, oh my goodness, I'm a terrible person. Why did they ask me to speak? I should have said no. And you'll just like
Okay.
spiral.
Right.
Whereas guilt, if you're having like a healthy sense of guilt, because guilt is one of those like warnings, well,
Mhm.
shame can be as well. And we can talk about that in a minute. But like
Yeah.
guilt is like, oh, well, yeah, I feel a little guilty because I didn't prepare. So
Right.
next time I need to give myself some time to prepare and not overbook myself. And so you feel that feeling of guilt of like, okay, but yeah, I should feel a little guilty because I didn't prepare. I didn't take it
Right.
seriously, but
Right.
that guilt is then a warning to tell you like, okay, well, now next time I know I need to prepare.
Right.
So then you know exactly what to do with it. And you're like, okay, well, yeah, I should have done better, but it doesn't send you to some deep, dark place or a black hole.
Yeah.
You're just like, oh, okay, yeah, I learned from that. I'll do better next time. Keep moving on.
Yeah. I
But
love
there's
that.
even like,
So
oh, go ahead.
I love that because I don't know if people really are feeling the difference in their body between, guilt and shame. I think,
Mm-hmm.
there's such a difference with saying I am bad, or oops, I did something bad, or I did something
Yeah.
wrong, or whatever. So, yeah, so talk about, you were saying that shame is also a warning. What does that look like?
Yeah. So say you do something that maybe doesn't line up with your values, because shame and your values and
Okay.
beliefs work very well together. So say, most of us don't believe in robbing, that's a good thing. So you
Right.
do that, you're going to feel some shame about that because your
Okay.
value was like, I'm not supposed to do that. So
Right.
I feel some shame. Like a
Right.
way you can recognize shame is like if you look down, people don't want to look at you, they might be feeling some shame. So, if you like kind of feel that sense of like, oh yeah, like I want to hide because I just did something I know I'm not supposed to do,
Yeah.
that's that shame. But it can also be a warning to be like, okay, well, I'm outside my limits. So
Right.
I need to like go back inside my limits. So, like looking at my marriage, I was saying the workshop and marriage happened very closely together. So
Okay.
before the workshop happened, so my husband is from Togo, West Africa. English is a second language. Their style of communication is completely different than like what I was used to. And so it was exhausting. And I knew that like going into marriage, but like I
Yeah.
saw his character, saw who he was as a person, and I was like, I've never met someone as amazing as you. So like That's a skill. You're willing to work on it. I'm willing to like
Right.
have the patience for you to work on that and not just be like, oh no, sorry.
Right.
But it was exhausting. And so what I didn't realize, because at that point I knew there was still something in there, but I didn't know what.
Okay.
And his communication would trigger that toxic shame.
Interesting.
And it would almost feel like, and I don't know if he was trying to, I don't think he was, but I think what happened was I would feel shame around that because one of the things I felt like was I'm bad at communicating.
Okay.
And so that kind of poked that, not once in a while, like every single day, 10 times a day. And so then
Wow.
I think my shame would like make sure, like, no, this is not my problem. This is your problem.
Okay.
Therefore, shaming him. So then he starts putting it on me. But because I have toxic shame and it's exhausting and overwhelming, like shame can make you angry because you're like, trying to keep yourself from feeling that. And so it was a combination of exhausting and toxic shame.
Wow.
So I would get impatient with him and raise my voice at him and like sometimes even like freak out because A, I was just so overwhelmed.
Mhm.
But then B, there was some times where I was like, this is not me. Like, I don't know this person. Like, what is happening? And it was him like triggering that toxic shame where I would just like lash out
Wow.
because it was just like a constant, consistent daily struggle. So at the time I get to that workshop,
Yeah.
like I remember in the early days of marriage, like I'm a terrible wife.
Right.
And that was like, I just thought, but I'm yelling at my husband. That's the last thing I would want to do. Something I never thought I would
Right.
do. We're both super easygoing and chill. Like, how are we yelling at each other?
Yeah.
And so then when I learned about like toxic shame and healthy shame and guilt and the difference, it would show up practically like, okay, no, you're not bad. You have some things in your childhood that you were trying to find, but you didn't know what they were. And this is highlighting that. So it's not fun and it's not pretty,
Mhm.
but it's making you aware of that so you can work on that. And then in the future, when I would react on him, I'd be like, no, like, I'm not a bad person.
Yeah.
I'm not a terrible person. Like, I'm human. And humans, when they're overwhelmed and pushed to their limits, they overheat, like my car today. I was trying
Exactly.
to get here for this interview and my car is like overheating and
Of
shutting
course.
down. Like,
Look, it's you're not the
uh-huh,
first one that's had something go wrong. This is what happens.
yes.
Always.
And so that's like what it would feel like inside of me, like a car,
Yes.
like overheating, or a computer, like slowing
Yes.
down because it's like, freaking out.
Right.
But really, all it needs is just to like step back. And so that's where knowing like
Yeah.
shame can be like, set your limits. And I'd be like, oh, okay. So, like, I know when I'm starting to escalate and like raise my voice or
Yeah.
whatever, that is a warning to me that I have a limit
Yeah.
because I'm human and I'm exceeding that limit.
Right.
And it doesn't match my value. Like, I don't want to be yelling at my husband.
Right.
So next time I need to put the boundary, a little bit back here and be like, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now.
Right.
Can we pause?
Yeah.
Simple. But I
Right.
didn't know or learn how to speak up. I was still in that process of learning to have a voice.
Right.
And the hardest part for me was in the emotional sense, because that's where I didn't feel accepted.
Okay.
I felt like, oh, you're too emotional. If you share a feeling, it
Yeah.
gets you in trouble. And so I just learned, even outside of home, like, oh, people don't always respond well to that. That's scary. Like, stay away.
Right.
So to do it in that kind of relationship when things are already heated, like he didn't know how to respond to it.
Right.
So then he would take it personal. And I'm like, no, it's not personal. Like, I'm just saying, I feel sad because of XYZ.
Yes.
And then he would take that personal. So then that made it hard for me to even speak up because I'm like, ding, 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 same thing is happening,
Right.
And so let me keep quiet. So then I would keep quiet, but that's what led to the overreacting
Right.
because I was keeping quiet and ignoring that warning sign.
So were you guys able then, so you guys were in the class together to then kind of learn what the toxic shame was? Were
It
you
was
learning
just
of that?
me. Like
Okay.
I
Okay.
went to
But
kind
you
of
were you
learn and unpack and see what was
okay.
happening.
Yeah. And so you were
Um,
able to explain that, kind of saying like, okay, this is what's happening to me. This is
yes.
this is why I'm having that reaction. You know, this is
Hmm.
really important for really, like you were talking about even at the beginning, listening to your body, right?
Yes.
Listening to your gut and being like, why am I yelling? You know, and I know that I don't, you know, I'm kind of generalize here a little bit, but there's certain times when people ask you for things or something is going on around you and people are demanding something of you and you get mad. I know I've been told that means people are crossing your boundaries, but it's not someone else's fault. And that's the thing that we have to remember is unfortunately, they're not just crossing our boundaries, we're allowing them to cross our boundaries.
I think a lot of times we don't even know there are boundaries that they're crossing. We just
Exactly.
haven't learned these things and these
Right.
skills. So we're like, well, this is just what people do. They just get mad. But
Right.
really, there's a point where we can stop it and be like, hey, I need a break.
Yeah.
And if the person doesn't respect that break, then you walk away and take that break so
Yeah.
you don't freak out because
Right.
you can only control what's inside your circle. The other
And
person is not in your circle, only
it's
you're in your
so
circle.
true. And you don't know, you're right, because you may not even know that they just crossed a boundary, right? Because you didn't even know you had a boundary. But this is the
Hmm.
time to listen to your body, because if you're annoyed that one more time this person has asked you for money or for whatever it is, and you're annoyed, you know, whatever the situation is, right? Just start being aware. Why am I mad? And you could be mad at yourself. I know there were so many times when people were crossing my boundaries, I'd be like, I'm mad at myself that I can't say no, and I don't know how to say no because
Hmm.
they might not like me. But that gets back. There we go, back to the people pleasing, the shame, all those
Hmm.
things that need to be healed. All those things that are in
Yeah.
our past. Look, we didn't get where we are without having a past. We all have a past. And so we've all been taught certain ways and we've allowed certain things. And so that's just
We,
great that you were able
yeah.
to do those kinds of things.
Yeah. It was so helpful. And like you were talking about boundaries and getting angry. One of the other things I learned in that workshop is if you don't have boundaries
Yes.
or you let people consistently cross them, you will get resentful.
Yes.
And so you can like feel that. Why does this person keep asking me for this money? And you don't even know, like,
Right.
because it seems completely normal to be frustrated at that person for continually asking money. But once I realized that, I was like, wow, I can look at my life and see situations where I'm starting to feel frustrated or angry or resentful
Right.
because I feel like I can't speak up. But once I remember, wait, you can speak up,
Right.
that dissipates. You know, like something simple this weekend, we were at a revival and there were these four little kids sitting next to us. The mom wasn't looking at them, wasn't
Yeah.
talking to them. So distracting. And
Yeah.
I'm starting to feel frustrated.
Yeah.
But as soon as I remember, wait, you're starting to feel frustrated because you think they're not your kids. So you can't be like, hey, you guys need to be quiet.
Right.
But I can. They're
Right.
sitting right next to me.
Right.
And I can be like, hey, can you guys be quiet?
Yeah.
And as soon as I remember that, I'm not even frustrated
Yeah.
about the situation. And I never even spoke up. But just that revelation of like, I can, if it gets to that point, cuts off that frustration or resentment or whatever.
Right.
That's like, why isn't this mom looking at her kids? You can't bring kids here and just not pay
Ignore
attention to
them.
them.
Yeah.
And as soon as that, revelation hits me, bam, it's gone. I don't think about it again.
I want to talk about because, and I don't know if you're prepared to talk about this. So, and I'm
Okay.
not really either, but I kind of want to talk about because that sounds really scary to someone who doesn't know how to set boundaries. Number one, okay, because that is a really big lesson. But the thought of setting a boundary for somebody sounds really scary because if you still have some people pleasing tendencies in you, there is that thing where, okay, if I set this boundary, they might get mad at me or they may not like me. So,
Mm-hmm.
what, I don't know, what can we speak on to that? Like, be brave, take those steps, do it. Like, you
Uh-huh.
kind of have to, I think you kind of talked about it earlier where you have to weigh your options, right? Like, is the cost, is it worth it? You know what I mean? Like, what's it going
Mm-hmm.
to do? My life's going to be better if I do this. And it
Yeah.
might look messy at the beginning. So I don't know if you can speak to that at all.
Yeah, there's a couple things that come to mind. One thing I think that's helped me a lot, like I remember when I was younger, I don't know why, but I made this commitment to myself to not let fear hold me back.
Okay.
So if I was afraid of doing something but wanted to do it, like skydiving, I was like, well, then I'm going to do it. I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm afraid, oh, I'm scared. If I want to do it, I'm going to sign up and I'm going to do it. Like,
Okay.
I'm not going to let fear hold me back. And so that has helped me in fearful situations like boundaries, speaking
Okay.
up, where you're like, I'm afraid, but I'm like, no, I've learned this is healthy. I'm not going to let fear hold me back.
Okay.
There's a couple books, and I can get you the titles of those, and we can link them in the show
Sure.
notes that have helped me. One is like a super simple book on boundaries, which I feel like is one of the best, most practical book on boundaries that I've come across. Because sometimes, like, I'm a very direct person,
Hmm.
and so I might just be like, "Be quiet," and
Right.
so like that doesn't always come across very
Right.
well. And but like I don't know how to do it differently. And so like that example of phrases that I can practice in my head, like,
Yes.
oh, okay, because I don't see how to do it differently.
Okay.
But when someone says it, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I like that. That's how I want to sound.
Yes.
That's how I want to come across. So that book has been very helpful.
Okay.
Another thing is false guilt. So there's a thing called false guilt. And when I learned that, it helped me so much, especially with boundaries.
Okay.
And I talk about that a little bit in my book, where when you first start setting boundaries, people very well may not react well. And then you
Yes.
feel bad. You may be
Yes.
like, I shouldn't have done that.
Right.
I made a mistake. Like maybe
Yes.
I was wrong. I thought I should do this. And you can start second guessing yourself.
Yes.
A lot of times, that second guilt, I mean, false guilt. There
Oh,
may be another piece of it where, like, yeah, maybe because in my experience, whenever I'm learning a new skill, like having a voice, setting boundaries, like we go from this to this, it's extreme. We go
yes.
from nothing to everything, and we gotta
Right.
kind of like regulate it. So
Yes.
we might feel a little bit guilty because maybe we got a little bit frustrated in it and raised our voice, and we aren't proud of 100% how we showed up,
Right.
but we're still proud that we spoke up.
Yes.
So like that's an element. But what I've learned is even when I can do it where like it matches my values and who I want to be, I can still feel false guilt based on how the other person shows up. And so I was a teacher. And so one of the examples I gave in my book was a teaching example, like in the school environment,
Okay.
where there's all these extra requirements,
Right.
but they're not technically legally required, but everyone just shows up because that's what you do.
Right.
So if you say no to that and people are like, why aren't you showing up? Like, you're supposed to be here, whatever it is they might say, you're probably going to start feeling guilty. But that's probably false guilt.
Okay.
If you showed up well, if you honored your values and you're doing what's best for you and your family, their response is on them. It's an optional thing. Just because 99% of the people are going doesn't mean
Yes.
you have to go. And so that's where, false guilt can come in. And knowing that was one of the most helpful things
Okay.
in setting boundaries, because I'd be like, okay, I could like know what was happening and then have the words to talk to myself and be like, usually I'll like close my eyes because I can just like go inside and like it
Yeah.
feels safe. So I just like close my eyes and be like, I'm okay. This is uncomfortable. And that's something
Yeah.
else I've had to learn, like embracing the uncomfortable. It's going to pass. And
Yes.
like, I did the right thing. That's best for me and my family. Like, I honored God, I honored myself, like, whatever it is that
Yes.
applies to the situation. And a lot of people don't agree with that, and that's okay. Like, they don't have to agree with it. You
Right.
know, they may think I'm not supporting the team or whatever it is they think,
Right. Right.
but they can think what they think. That doesn't make it true. And so
Yes.
that would give me the tools to like talk to myself, which would then kind of ease it. And then each time you do it, it's like a muscle. So
Yes.
it gets stronger and stronger. And then the
Right.
more you do it, the more practice you get, you know? And so you're starting to hit that middle ground. And then you're like, oh, wow, like I'm nailing it. This is just like false guilt. This is so cool. Like, and you just start getting excited and doing a happy dance.
It's so true. I love that you were talking about that, you have to honor yourself. And I think that's the biggest thing, and why we're just going to stay in, maybe even in a resentment cycle, if we don't, start flexing that muscle and start building that muscle of setting the boundaries where we feel like we need to set the boundaries. And then also, we cannot control how other people react, because
Mm-hmm.
they say that, look, anywhere you go to read about boundaries, feel free to Google healthy boundaries. They will tell you it'll get worse before it gets better. And so you got to be strong. And that's how you're going to build that muscle, especially if you've never done it before. Look, it hurts sometimes to have someone. I've had people yell at me saying, you need to do this, you have to do it, you have to, and I would say, no, I'm sorry, I don't have to do that, and I'm not going to.
Mm-hmm.
Does it suck? Yes. But I think, is it Brene Brown who says embrace the suck? Is she the one who says that? It's very possible.
Probably.
It's very possible. Yeah, Brene Brown, she's amazing. I love her. I love listening to her. She's so
There's a lot of good
wise.
stuff.
Yeah, she's so wise with so many things. She was one of the ones, I call her Queen Bee, because she was so part of, such an instrumental part of my healing, because I never learned about vulnerability and, healthy boundaries, those kinds of things, those things that I feel like are adult conversations. Okay, like, I don't know, it took me until I was 48 to, like, finally at 48 I was like, I really should, like, figure this out. Like, I don't
Uh-huh.
I should figure some of this stuff out. But it took time. And when people ask now, like, oh, how did you do that, how did you set that boundary, it's like, it takes practice. It takes so much practice when
So
someone's
much practice.
so much practice when someone says, you have to do this, or I don't want to be part of your life, or this is going to happen, or whatever. And I'm comfortable saying, I'm not going to do that. I'm okay with that. But it
Mm-hmm.
does take practice. It does take practice. So, where are you at now? What are you doing? And how are you doing? How are you doing? So,
Yeah. So I hadn't done a podcast or done a lot with my book in the last couple of years because
yeah.
I started selling jewelry, started putting my focus into that. And so I went back for this interview to reread my book and kind of just like refresh my memory and
Yeah.
prepare. And it was just like amazing. It was like watching someone else's life from the outside. Cause like I've been seeing my progress and seeing my growth,
Yes.
but like just looking at it, it was incredible.
Yeah.
Like I talked about earlier, being superhuman and subhuman and bouncing
Yes.
between the two. Like every time I got to human, I would be so excited. I'd be like, oh my
Yes.
goodness, in this situation before, I would have been superhuman or I would have gone to subhuman.
That's so great.
And I was like, I knew that, but like reading that book or reading my book, it was like, wow, yeah, like when is the last time I've been superhuman or subhuman? Like it really,
That's awesome.
I don't know, made me stop and think about it.
Hmm.
And I was like, in the situation I'm in, like, because marriage has still been hard, up and
Uh-huh.
down. We've been
Yeah.
married 4.5 years, and it wasn't until year 4 that it really like turned a corner.
Okay.
And like any healing, it's like this. And so all of the years were like this, even in our marriage. But it was like a lot of little circles, but still the overall trajectory being up. But then at year 4, it was a little bit more of a straight line with
Yeah.
less turnarounds to get there.
Right.
And like that would be such an easy place for me to fall into, okay, I'm going to be superhuman and I'm going to do this perfectly. So if I
Yes.
do this perfectly, like he'll show up perfectly.
Yeah.
No. you may show up 100%, but the other person may not, no
Yeah.
matter how well you show up. And
Yeah.
so sometimes, like, as I was really practicing boundaries, like, he would get upset about them. He
Yeah.
wouldn't respect them. I'd be like, well, shoot, now what do I do? So that would be an easy place to go to like subhuman
Right.
or superhuman. Like, I'm going to just like power through and I'm going to do
Right.
this. And if I do this, this will like work everything out. Or when I don't, go down here. And I was like, it's been a long time since I've been superhuman or subhuman. Like, wow.
That's great.
Because there were so many triggers, that would really could easily have sent me back to one place or the other. Earlier on, you were asking, like, what other struggles did I go to Regeneration for? I
Yeah.
went for that one. But throughout that, like, I really realized, like, I'm an emotional eater. Like, when life gets really, really hard,
Yeah.
I may even binge eat.
Yeah.
And, like, that was something I knew, but I didn't have the words for or the label for. And I just kind of think,
Okay.
oh, probably everyone does it. I hear about emotional eating.
Right.
Like, I don't know. And, like, seeing then in marriage, because God brought a lot of victory for me through regeneration, like marriage, like
Yeah.
it was hard 50% of the time our first year of marriage.
Yeah.
But I didn't turn to emotional binge eating or comfort eating. And I was like, wow, like that would have been a huge trigger for
Right.
me. And so just like things like that,
Yeah.
even in the rough season of marriage, like speaking up can still be hard for me
Yeah.
in certain things. And so, like, I'll be like, I'll speak up and then it won't go well. So then I'll be like, okay, well, next time I can't say I'm feeling frustrated because I don't feel heard because he's going to get mad and then it's
Yeah.
going to turn into a fight. But then what do I do? And it's like, no, okay, well, I just have to keep doing that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, sometimes I may keep quiet because I think, you know what, it's not that important that I don't feel heard right now. I'll bring it up later. Or sometimes I may, forget about it and just, I'm feeling vulnerable, excuse me, and unsafe. So maybe I'm like a little bit of that little girl
Mm-hmm. Right.
coming back out. And I'm like, whoa, 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 no,
Right.
you got to speak up. Like what he does, like that's on him. And like
Yes.
he's learning and growing too. And, so it's like both a journey for both of us in different ways. But like I still got to do what is the healthy thing to do,
Yes.
even if it doesn't go the way I want. And I have to not be scared of a fight because we've had so many and they can get long and exhausting. So
Right.
it makes sense up here to be like, oh no, I can't lose a week of my life for this whole recovery
Right.
journey after the fight and picking up the pieces. And it's like, no, I can. Like, if that
Yes.
happens, I can.
Yeah.
And that was something also Dr. Caroline Leaf,
Yes. Love her.
can't think of the name of her book, Cleaning Up the Mental Mess.
I
No,
think it's
21 Day Detox,
okay.
21 Day Brain Detox. That's the one. That one was also super helpful for me.
Yes.
And just like, I was lacking resilience, learning that I can become resilient.
Okay.
Because there was just like emotional and verbal abuse in my childhood. And
Okay.
so that didn't make me very resilient. And I just thought
Yeah.
that's the way I am. But she really helped me learn and see like that can be developed, that can be um grown. And I would watch, like, because the first year of our marriage, like it was literally 50% of the time, like every other day it was something. It was
Yeah.
exhausting.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, what did I get myself into? Like, this is
Right.
not what I thought I signed up for. Like,
Right.
I signed up for a what? It's 50, 60 years ago? Like, how?
Yeah.
Like, no, I always said I'd rather be happily single than unhappily married.
Right.
And so I would feel like some of that childhood feeling of like, oh my goodness, like I want to die. I haven't felt this pain in years, but it's back and I don't know what to do and I can't do this. But I would watch my husband living the exact same situation as me. Hey, it's okay. We're learning. And I was like,
Oh, wow.
what do you mean we're learning? This is normal. Like, aren't you scared? Aren't you freaked out? And that's kind of where I saw like, there's something different here and I need to dig into that. And that's where I
Yeah.
kind of got Dr. Caroline Leaf. And she talks about like learning to embrace the uncomfortable. And I was like, oh, that's a brilliant thought. Like, I don't like the uncomfortable. I run
Right.
from it. Like,
Right.
let me be okay with being uncomfortable. And so that was also just a big piece because it was like, okay, yeah, we can fight and it can be uncomfortable. And yes, it is going to take a lot out of me
Yeah.
and it is going to hurt. But if it goes there, A, I can walk away sooner because now I know that, like, that's a limit that I need to put up.
Right.
And B, if I don't, I know I can handle it.
I like that idea of learning resilience. I love Dr. Caroline Leaf, and so
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna look at some of her stuff about that because that word has been coming up so often lately, and I want to see what that looks like because it's so true, especially when we're learning new things and been when we've been living a certain way for so long, maybe we don't know what some of these new things, how they're going to affect us. What does it look like to be resilient? And because resilience is not being a doormat, that's not resilience. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? And so learning those things. So that's really interesting. And I like the idea of the more you practice this too, that when something still knocks you off balance, because this does not mean you're going to be perfect, doesn't mean you're not going to be
Mm-mm.
triggered, it doesn't mean that, but this is what happens. This is what I've learned, and maybe you can relate to this, that when something knocks you off balance or you get triggered, you can recover faster.
Yes.
You recover faster because you have the tools and you have the muscle because you've been practicing that. So I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you've seen that as well with if you get
Yeah.
triggered, because it's not like you're never going to get triggered again.
No. Like my husband still triggers me.
Right.
And I've seen A, he can poke at that toxic shame and I don't just get angry.
Yeah.
If he keeps going, if I don't walk away, I will. But
Yeah.
my emotional resilience or that capacity
Yes.
to hear it is way bigger. Before maybe it'd be instant and second sentence I'm out or I'm mad at him. Whereas
Yes.
now I can like take a few and be like, hey, like let's try and bring this down. I don't have to just immediately kind of run away or freak out, one or the other.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, this isn't working. Now I'm gonna walk away, but I gave it a try. I have that capacity to kind of sit there in that uncomfortable and see if we can
Yeah.
in that moment get to the other side. And also just even myself in just like the recovery, because it's not something we're proud of, but we would like once it would start, it would be like a dam that would break out, and
Yeah.
like we couldn't get off that like hamster wheel.
Right.
So it might be going on and off for hours. Well, that is exhausting physically,
Yes.
emotionally, spiritually. And like in the early days, it would knock me out. Like I would just be
Right.
like depleted. It
Right.
might take me 2 or 3 days before I had like energy and life and felt somewhat like myself.
Yeah.
Now it can be the very next day,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's good, and that does take practice to do those things, and when especially you lived a lot of years, right, with narcissism and shame and all that, and so it's hard to not, you can't just change overnight, and you're not going
No.
to stop being triggered overnight. And I find that for myself too. Every once in a while, somebody will say something, I'm like, "You're a narcissist," and it's like, no, I can't react like this.
Uh-huh.
And I said to my therapist, I'm like, "Is everyone a narcissist?" She's like, "No, just you're gonna be okay." I'm like, "Okay,
All right. Yeah.
fine," but it's true. I mean, sometimes you're being triggered, and it's sometimes it's a big surprise that it's happening. but
Uh-huh. And it
but
takes time, like you said. Like
yeah.
I can see early on, like post college, some of that healing started with just, realizing like, oh, this is different. Like, oh, okay, so I can speak up. And then like
Yeah.
trying with a few friends and seeing like, oh, they didn't like freak out on me or make me feel bad.
Yes.
Like, okay. So you like slowly start unlearning that
Yeah.
at say 22.
Yeah.
And like over the years, just like different pieces and different layers came off. And by the time I got married, like I thought I was pretty healthy. And I
Yeah.
thought I mean, I was pretty healthy, but
Yeah.
I thought like, I've gotten through all the big things. Now it's just kind of like maintenance. And
Yeah.
nope, like marriage, like
Nope.
there is still toxic shame there that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah.
So you don't pass it on. But
Right.
once you see it and you're aware of it, you know what to do with it.
Yes.
And that's one of the most helpful things is knowing what you're working with so you know how to work with it.
Yeah,
And
seriously.
as much as like marriage has sucked for us, like we've had really beautiful times,
Yeah.
but like I've learned so much from him, just like
Yeah.
seeing how emotionally resilient he was. I
Right.
was like, what is this? Like, you're crazy. Like, what do you mean we're going to be okay? Like, how does your mind not go to the places I'm going? I thought everyone went there.
Oh my
And like
gosh.
learning from that and being around that, like, has been good for me. And as much as
Yeah.
it sucks, having to like speak up and still work through like breakdowns in communication and
Yeah.
not just be understood or taken seriously, like, it gives me practice
Yes.
to speak up to where that muscle is like, okay, like I'm getting strong at this of
Right.
like, I know I got to speak up even though it may not go well because it does. It takes a lot of practice. And
It
so
does.
in our setting, we get a lot of practice, which is a bitter sweet coin.
That's right. Well, it might be pretty common in marriages. You're two different people coming together and you have to learn how to live together and have a life together. So it takes time for that. I like
Yeah.
what you were saying, how you practice with some friends. You'd like set a little boundary and they didn't freak out with you. And I had talked about that on another episode because somebody asked, well, how do you practice being vulnerable or stuff like that? And I did the same thing with certain friends. I'd say like, I'd start talking about a certain thing in my divorce or whatever. And some people were receptive and some people weren't. And those people who are receptive, or even the ones that say, like, oh, I want to hear about what's happening and things like that, you got to remember, those are your safe people. It's okay to just like try a little bit, like just practice a little bit, just practice setting a boundary, saying, oh, no, I don't want to do that or whatever. And then you'll see it'll be okay. Like, we don't start out
Yeah.
lifting 100 pounds, like that's not the
No.
way it works. You got to build your muscle a little bit at a time. So just take little baby steps and remember that you're not responsible for how they react to
Yeah.
the boundary.
And pick safe people to start with because
Yes.
if you start with someone who's not safe or not
No.
healthy, it's just going to like kick you
Correct.
in the gut. But if you can find something small, hey,
Yes.
can you come to my birthday party? Unfortunately, I can't. I would love to be there. That's something small, something probably relatively safe,
Yes.
but you're going to feel good and it's going to
Yes.
give you some motivation and kind of fuel some more because you're like, oh, wow, like
Yes.
I spoke up for myself. I said no in something little that like I wanted to go, but really like I just didn't have capacity for it.
Right.
And then that's just going to feel more and then you'll get stronger and stronger.
And one of the things, teaching people, just having conversations with people who ask about boundaries and stuff, is not even having to explain yourself
Yes.
when you say no. That's part of the boundary. Is when somebody says, can you make it to my party? I said, oh, I'm so sorry, I can't that night. End of story. That's it. You don't have to say, I'm really tired, I'm going to be working. You don't have to give a
Mm-hmm.
reason. You do not have to explain yourself. And there's a lot of freedom in that as well. And say, my therapist taught me, let's just leave it at that. If somebody says, well, why, well, let's just leave it at that. I just can't make it. Let's just leave it at
Yeah,
that.
because some people will.
Yeah. And I really, because I was like, I really want to be able to set boundaries with some people, but not be rude, because I don't want to
Yeah.
be rude.
Same.
And I was like, but I don't have words for that. And she said, oh, okay, well, I love saying, well, let's just leave it at that. I'm not able to do that, or no, I didn't, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not doing that. And then if they bother you again, say, well, let's just leave it at that.
I like that. That phrase is perfect. Let's
I
just leave it at that.
know.
It's soft It's firm and they keep pushing. You can just repeat it again. Let's just leave it
I
at that.
yes, and
Hey, let's
that's
just leave it at that.
this is the way it is. Yes, because yeah, because there were some people that were asking me certain questions that I thought were very crass, and I didn't even know how to react. I was like, and I thank God I was like, let's just leave it at no. We're just
That
gonna leave.
works in so many situations.
Oh,
I'm totally going to use that phrase because I've yet to find
yes,
one that I'm like, that is the one I'm looking for, and
I am
that is the
telling
one
you,
I'm
that's
looking
it.
for.
I'll send you half my copay bill, okay? No, just kidding.
Okay.
For therapy. It was so good. Was there anything else you wanted to share with everybody today before we say goodbye?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so
Just,
either. We covered a lot
yeah,
of good stuff. Thank you
yeah.
so much for sharing your story and being with us. You gave us so many good tips that I know are going to help people. And there's going to be a ton of resources in the show notes. So please go to the show notes and see. We're gonna give you so many links. You guys are gonna be you're gonna be linked up. And then there will be a social media post about Emily on the That's Where I'm At podcast Facebook page and Instagram. And then you can comment on her picture if anything resonated with you about that, or if you have any questions. I'd love for you guys to do that. Thank you, Emily, for being here. I really
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad you were here. All right, guys, we will see you next time. Thank you for being here. Bye.